Evening News with Harry Reisner substituting for Walter Cronkite. And Roger Mudd in Washington. Dan Rather in Washington. Marvin Kalb in Washington. Peter Kalischer in Paris. Robert Shackney in New Orleans. Terry Drinkwater in San Diego. Don Webster near Phuoc Vinh, South Vietnam. And Bill Stout in Los Angeles.
Good evening. President Nixon has begun to undo some of the last acts of the Johnson administration. Today, he rescinded Mr. Johnson's decision approving new Pacific passenger routes for 4 U.S. airlines and a cargo route for a 5th. Mr. Nixon said he is recalling the case for further review and decision. Earlier, the new president withdrew 485 nominations, which Mr. Johnson had sent to the Senate. Most were for postmasterships, but the nominations also included 2 ambassadors and 5 judges. Among them was that of an appellate judgeship for Harold Barefoot Sanders, Jr., a close associate and legislative advisor of Mr. Johnson. Also, that of former Vietnam pacification chief Robert Comer as ambassador to Turkey. While stopping confirmation of the Johnson appointees, Mr. Nixon also watched the swearing in of the last member of his cabinet, Interior Secretary Walter Hickel. Dan Rather was there.
That I will well and faithfully perform
the duties of the office
upon
which I am about to enter.
So help me God.
Secretary.
Millionaire Hickel came to Washington with a reputation for perhaps being too friendly with oil interests and not friendly enough with Indians to be Interior Secretary. Only after a roasting in Congress was he allowed to be sworn in today by Chief Justice Earl Warren. One reason Hickel had such a hard time was his statement that he opposed conservation for conservation's sake. Mr. Nixon, who has been accused of being humorless, used that line to introduce a few jokes.
I'm sure that enough editorial note has been taken of the fact that his confirmation has taken a little longer than some of the other members of the cabinet. If I may paraphrase him, however, that does not concern us. We're not interested in confirmation for confirmation's sake. But I should point out, too, that he already has rendered service far beyond the call of duty. In the first 4 days of this administration, he, rather than I, have been the subject of the Herblock cartoons, and I'm grateful for that.
Vice President Spiro Agnew appeared with New York Mayor John Lindsay to announce that the federal government will allow New York City to have the old Brooklyn Navy Yard at a reduced price for ghetto job development. Agnew was asked if this new policy on government property would apply only to New York.
Oh, no. No, this is a pattern that we hope to develop on a nationwide basis. Of course, legislation would be effective nationwide.
At the Defense Department, David Packard was sworn in by Defense Secretary Melvin Laird as Deputy Secretary of Defense. Despite Senate criticism because he owns millions in defense-oriented electronics stock, the California industrialist finally was confirmed yesterday.
I would like to say a word about the vote in the Senate yesterday because I feel very honored that the senators placed this trust in me. I realize it was a serious question they had to consider, and I respect their vote as a solemn obligation, in a solemn obligation on my part, to do the very best I can to maintain this trust which the Senate has given me.
With the new Secretary of State William Rogers looking on, his undersecretary and alter ego, Elliot Richardson, was sworn into diplomatic power. So, too, the new counselor of the State Department, Richard Pedersen, a career Foreign Service officer who met Rogers at the United Nations a few years ago. And the new chief of protocol, New York businessman and yachtsman Emil Bus Mossbacher. Diplomacy stopped for an hour while Senator Edward Kennedy and others paused to meet the new GOP foreign policy establishment. The transition from Rusk to Rogers has been smooth and gentlemanly. Feelings have not been ruffled, but neither have many important decisions been made. Like their leader, these men are moving so cautiously that at the moment no one has a clear grasp of American policy, especially in the Middle East. The French want a four-power meeting at the UN. Cairo hinted today the new administration might agree even if the old one did not. But U.S. officials who should know say they have received no new instructions. Like other problems which continue to fester and in some cases worsen, the Middle East must wait for the shaking down process here to be completed. Perhaps conscious of such transition delays, the President has scheduled a meeting of the National Security Council for tomorrow, his second this week. Marvin Kalb, CBS News, Washington.
President Nixon has ordered an urgent review of U.S. efforts to get food to Biafrans starving because of the Nigerian Civil War. The White House said Mr. Nixon fully shares the deep humanitarian concerns in a proposed Senate resolution urging more aid. President Nixon has scheduled his first broadcast White House news conference for 11 a.m. Eastern Time Monday. CBS News will cover the event live and in color.
Dogs evoke an emotion in humans. Not identical in every human, but it's there. Call it love. You care about his health. His food, does it taste good? Is it what he needs? Will it help him live a long life? Purina Dog Chow is all of that. It is so complete, all you add is love.
Some cats have found a flavor barrier in dry cat foods. Until now. Now Purina Cat Chow has opened up a new taste sensation. New invigorated flavor with more protein-rich flavors cats crave. And the highest protein of all cat foods. Highest protein and invigorated flavor. Only in new Purina Cat Chow.
In Czechoslovakia, a young student who burned himself to death to protest the Soviet occupation will be buried tomorrow, and the Czechoslovak army has been placed on alert to deal with any possible anti-Soviet demonstrations. In Prague today, thousands paid final tribute to the student. We have a film report by way of satellite, narrated by CBS News correspondent Peter Kalischer in Paris.
Candles and flowers, old persons weep, and youths stand a flag vigil in Prague's Wenceslas Square in honor of 21-year-old Jan Palach, who committed suicide by fire protesting Russian curbs on his country's freedom. Palach's funeral takes place tomorrow, and this square will be jammed with even more people. Today there are no demonstrations, except demonstrations of grief, and a solemn changing of the guard ceremony by Czech students. Outside Charles University, where Palach was a philosophy student, a long line of mourners carry flowers to deposit at his coffin lying in state inside. The flowers are carried in, the lines extend, the people weep. The Czech government is fearful that an outburst of anti-Russian sentiment will bring Soviet tanks back into the capital, but officially they and the university faculty, dressed in 15th century costumes, paid tribute to Palach. Palach will be buried in a cemetery reserved for Czech heroes, and there is no question that in the eyes of his countrymen, he already is one. Peter Kalischer, CBS News, reporting.
According to Vatican sources, a Vatican radio broadcast yesterday praising the Czechoslovak students who set themselves on fire was made at the direction of the Pope's Secretariat of State. The Associated Press said that the broadcast upset many Vatican officials. Traditional Roman Catholic doctrine condemns suicide, whatever the reason. Student unrest in Spain has prompted the government of Francisco Franco to impose modified martial law there for 3 months. The order enables authorities to ban all meetings, to jail persons indefinitely, and to search homes without warrants. The government also has closed Spain's 2 major universities and will reintroduce full censorship of the Spanish press. Officials claim that the student disorders are part of a plot to plunge Spain into chaos. In Pakistan, officials ordered a curfew in Dhaka today, following anti-government demonstrations in which police killed 3 persons and wounded 30.
You know what's nice about the new cars? They keep the air cleaner than the old ones did, especially when you use Phillips 66 gasolines and Trop Arctic motor oils. The anti-pollution team. Both have detergent additives that help keep your carburetor, pistons, PCV valve, and other engine parts clean while you drive. And because your engine stays cleaner, so does the air. Maybe clean air is all the reason you need to use our anti-pollution team. But isn't it nice to get a better running engine in the bargain? The anti-pollution team, only from Phillips 66. At Phillips 66, it's performance that counts.
Herman Clifford, the assistant principal of a Washington, D.C. high school, was shot to death today while trying to catch 3 young robbers in the school's crowded hallway. Police said they got away with about $350 in cash and checks from a student bank. In addition to the 3 being sought, police arrested a 17-year-old boy and questioned a 19-year-old. The Senate subcommittee studying electoral college reform today heard testimony from the North Carolina Nixon elector who cast his ballot for George Wallace. Roger Mudd reports.
Dr. Lloyd Bailey, the North Carolina Republican elector, said today he voted for George Wallace because Richard Nixon had endorsed the Johnson no-win policy in Vietnam. It was also clear Dr. Bailey distrusts the majority rule in a democracy because the average voter is being misled by press TV conspiracy.
If there is one thing that is important to the survival of our country, it is to keep the republic from being changed into a democracy. Because as a republic, this country has made unprecedented gains and has grown stronger and greater than any country in the history of the world. Democracies, on the other hand, have fallen to the wayside. And who would gain in this world if we would fall by the wayside? It could only point in one direction.
But the next witness, former presidential aide Theodore Sorensen, was contemptuous of Bailey's testimony.
We profess to believe in democracy as well as being a republic. And I don't mean a democracy according to the 1928 Army Campaign Manual. But we continue a system which was originated to concentrate basic political power in the hands of an affluent, well-educated elite, and which today permits a faithless few in a faceless body to defy the public will in order to bargain for private gain. In my opinion, this nation's present presidential electoral system is a live bomb buried in the Constitution that must be defused before, not after, it explodes in our faces.
Sorensen apologized for not having time to defend President Nixon's aides, Kissinger, McCracken, and Moynihan, against Dr. Bailey's attacks of pro-communism, saying their defense should be made by the Republican members of the subcommittee. The lone Republican member present, Strom Thurmond of South Carolina, remained silent. Roger Mudd, CBS News, Washington.
The Transportation Department acknowledged today that the Illinois Central Railroad was negotiating for a $25 million federal grant at the same time that the head of the department was negotiating for the railroad's $95,000 a year presidency. Both were successful. But the department said that the then Secretary of Transportation, Alan Boyd, took no part in approval of the grant, even though he probably knew about the application for the money to buy new commuter cars. A National Airlines jet with 47 persons aboard was hijacked while flying from Key West to Miami today and forced to go to Cuba. The plane landed safely at Havana 35 minutes after the pilot reported by radio that there was a kid with a knife in the cockpit. Some airlines, including National, now give pilots who may have to go to Cuba freeze cards, English in one column, Spanish in the other, in hopes of avoiding any misunderstanding with a hijacker. There are 8 phrases, and the pilot is supposed to find the one he needs in English and show the translation to the hijacker. One phrase says, proceeding to Cuba as directed. Another says, I must open my flight bag for maps. And 4 give reasons for not going, including not enough fuel and bad weather. At a Moscow news conference today, cosmonaut Alexei Leonov, the first man to walk in space, briefly and unexpectedly referred to the shooting incident during a motorcade to the Kremlin 2 days ago. Leonov was in the second car, the one shot at by the gunman, who was quickly seized, but about whom there have been no further details. Leonov seemed to back the official version that Kremlin leaders apparently were not the gunman's target, although there is still speculation to the contrary. Leonov's remarks finally were interrupted by a Soviet official at the news conference who said that this is enough about this incident.
Dull people don't get heartburn. The exciting man gets heartburn.
gets more out of life than meat and potatoes. The kind of guy who'll take chances, experiments. Who, when he goes to a Chinese restaurant, doesn't order number 1 or number 2. He orders flaming filet of yak Peking style. Why? Because he's never had flaming filet of yak Peking style. And if he gets heartburn, so what? He won't have it for long. He takes an Alka-Seltzer. With Alka-Seltzer, he need not be afraid. After all, it is better to have lived and had heartburn than never to have lived at all.
In Los Angeles, a jury of 8 men and 4 women was agreed upon today by the prosecution and defense to hear the case of Sirhan Sirhan, accused of assassinating Senator Robert Kennedy. Several alternates still have to be chosen, and a defense motion is pending to dismiss the grand jury indictment against Sirhan. Testimony may not begin for more than a week. Bill Stout reports on the drawn-out jury selection process.
It's possible to draw a few broad conclusions about the kind of men and women who ultimately will decide the fate of Sirhan Sirhan. The prosecutor has said the key question is what went on in Sirhan's mind when he shot Senator Kennedy. Sirhan, often smiling, may not look the part, but the defense says there will be no attempt to deny he fired the fatal shot. Over and over, the prospective jurors are asked about the death penalty and psychiatry. The prosecution wants no one flatly opposed to capital punishment. The defense wants only those who see psychiatry as a valid science. The defense says there will be no attempt to deny he fired the fatal shot. Judge Herbert Walker made his first critical ruling when he excused a jury candidate who said she never could vote to execute anyone for any crime. Mrs. Alvina Alvidrez was the first to voice objections to the death penalty after 20 in a row who had no objections. The prosecution challenged her, the judge agreed. When 12 jurors had been tentatively seated, Mrs. Alicia Duke, an accountant in state government, was the first to go on peremptory challenge, excused by the prosecution, no reason given. Among those still seated, George Brumus, longtime employee of the City Water and Power Department. Among his reasons for not wanting to serve, his wife won't like it. The judge overruled him, and he was seated. Lawrence Morgan, a computer programmer, said that if he voted for execution, he could say so to Sirhan's face. Miss Susan Brum, phone company employee, said she could put in the expected 3 months of the trial without hardship. Benjamin Glick, in the clothing business, said the Arab background of the defendant would make no difference in his deliberation.
With the appearance of Glick, the only Jew on the panel, another of the many complications in this case came to the surface. He was questioned closely about the Arab-Israeli situation. There are 2 or 3 other minority group members, Mexican Americans, but there are no blacks. So the jury selected is the end product of long and careful questioning about politics and religion, about the publicity given the case, and each person's feelings about the death penalty. All that, plus the requirement of giving up 3 months without feeling the pinch, has resulted in this panel with little or no representation for the blacks and the poor and the young, all of whom Robert Kennedy considered part of his natural constituency. Bill Stout, CBS News, reporting.
At another trial in New Orleans, a businessman is charged in an alleged plot to assassinate President Kennedy. CBS News correspondent Robert Shackney reports.
It's been 4 days since the Clay Shore trial opened in the Orleans Parish Criminal Court, and not a single piece of evidence or a line of testimony has been introduced. The problem is picking a jury. No cameras are allowed in court. This is a studio replica of Judge Edward Haggerty's courtroom, and it'll be some time before the jury benches will be as full in fact as they are here. It took 3 days of intensive questioning to select the first 6 jurors. And the questions that are being put to other jurors make it plain that this will be a long, drawn-out trial. That alone is one reason the jury selection itself is so slow. For each would-be juror is asked, are you prepared to spend 6 to 8 weeks locked up away from job and family? Many would-be jurors say they can't. 35 were excused today before a 7th acceptable juror finally was sworn in. Through it all, the defendant, Clay Shaw, sits quietly, chain smoking continually, still waiting for that first testimony that will try to link him with the assassination of President Kennedy. Robert Shackney, CBS News, New Orleans.
Senate Majority Leader Mike Mansfield said today he would not be surprised if the Senate Armed Services Committee, the Foreign Relations Committee, or both, decided to investigate the seizure of the intelligence ship Pueblo. A naval court of inquiry is ending the first week of hearings into the case in Coronado, California. Today's testimony was behind closed doors, partly because classified information was being discussed. During a recess, Commander Lloyd Booker's civilian attorney, Miles Harvey, spoke to Terry Drinkwater and other reporters.
Mr. Harvey, do you feel... ...him and ask him not to go into some of these things, to temper his testimony somewhat, and did he just go ahead anyway because he wanted to get the story out?
No, Commander Booker's a very strong-willed individual, and I think even if I had tried to counsel him or prepare him on how to testify, he wouldn't have followed my advice. So I did not, no.
Do you feel that the court itself is properly going about getting the facts? Is it fair in your judgment?
To me, it has been totally fair so far. I think the telling portion will be from this point forward.
The closed sessions.
Right. What happens in the closed sessions, what witnesses does Captain Newsom call, and simply how does the court proceed from this point.
Do you intend to take any action to bring out some of the questions he's raised by higher commands? For example, the commander of naval forces in Japan and other commands.
We anticipate that Admiral Johnson will be a witness before this court, and of course we have the right of cross-examination. Depending on Admiral Johnson's testimony, we will or will not exercise that right.
What is it you want to learn from Admiral Johnson?
Well, I think there's a great deal of information about the estimate of risk and the reason why the USS Pueblo in its condition was found off North Korea's coast at that time. These type of answers, I think, have to come from someone other than Commander Booker.
It was announced in Washington tonight that the maximum interest rate for mortgages insured by the Federal Housing Administration and the Veterans Administration has been raised to 7.5%. The new Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, George Romney, said the action was taken to attract private loan funds now going elsewhere because of higher yields. Prices closed mixed on the New York Stock Exchange today. Volume was 12.5 million shares. The exchange index lost 1 cent.
What a good time. What a good time. What a good time for a cat. Catching sunbeams or dodging raindrops, looking for rainbows high on a hilltop, and suddenly suspended in space, the top of the world is our special place where we play. Of Kent was meant for a day like today.
Anytime, anywhere the fun is a good time for a Kent. You light up, and a good taste happens.
What a good time for a Kent.
In Vietnam, enemy gunners shot down an American medical evacuation helicopter in the Central Highlands. There were 7 men aboard, including 3 wounded soldiers, and all were killed. The United States Command said the helicopter was the 999th lost in combat in Vietnam. In Paris, Chief American Negotiator Henry Cabot Lodge met with Vice President Key of South Vietnam to complete preparations for the expanded peace talks tomorrow. There will be no fixed agenda for the meeting, and any of the 4 delegations can bring up any subject it chooses. This evening, we have a film report from Don Webster in South Vietnam showing how the Allies are trying to make propaganda gains from the Paris talks.
This loudspeaker has been set up in the midst of the jungle on a communist infiltration route in from Cambodia. We are telling the North Vietnamese that we are negotiating again in Paris, and soon your troops will be withdrawn from South Vietnam. Why die in a hopeless, fruitless cause? 2 companies from the 1st Air Cavalry Division landed here the day before. They are ready to fight, but they hope to persuade the enemy that the war is almost over. With the U.S. troops are 3 recent defectors, Chu Hois as they're called. The first defectors came just minutes after the U.S. troops landed.
Just after we moved out of the perimeter about 200 meters, the point man saw somebody walking out to his front and dropped. The individual coming in yelled, "Chu Hoi," and we responded, and the man did come into the perimeter. Right after that, we saw movement off to the left. 2 more finally came in right after that, for a total of 3.
What do you think made these communists surrender?
It's hard for us to say here personally, but we've had an awful big psychological warfare program going on, i.e. leaflets, loudspeaker systems, as well as the Chu Hois themselves trying to get them in for us.
Do you think that the Paris peace talks may affect the fighting at all from here on? Do you think either side might fight less vigorously, thinking that the war may almost be over?
That's a hard question to answer because we all do what we have to do when we're driving on. I think we're all looking for the same thing, an end to the war. And what we have to do is our job right now.
What's of particular concern to these U.S. soldiers is what the defectors had to say. Where were the communist troops heading?
Well, the best that we can determine, they were heading for Saigon as part of this new offensive that everyone's been talking about.
What were their instructions specifically?
The Chu Hoi that we picked up stated they were going to march from the border down to Saigon or War Zone D for about 15 days, then rest, and then attack Saigon from there.
So that would mean they might have been attacking about the time of Tet.
That's what it looks like.
Isn't there a danger that the Paris peace talks may influence American troops, that they may say to themselves, this war is going to be settled at a negotiating table in Paris. Why should I take a chance and perhaps get killed here? Is that a danger?
Yes, it is a danger for a few, but the great majority of GIs are too busy and too concerned with their activities on the battlefield to be worried about the Paris peace talks.
Do you think most GIs here think the war is about to end?
No, I don't believe they do. They remember the lessons of the Korean War where the negotiations went on for 2 years while the war was still being fought. They realize here that this war may be gone for months or even years.
Do you think there's any connection with the performance in the next year or two in the war and the negotiations in Paris?
Most definitely. The whole purpose of having a war is to carry out State Department policy. We are an instrument of the State Department. So how well we perform here will determine how well our negotiators do in Paris.
To these troops, the peace talks seem very remote. If the war is in its twilight, there's no sign of it or talk of it here. Don Webster, CBS News, near Phuoc Vinh, South Vietnam.
That's the news. This is Harry Reasoner for Walter Cronkite. Good night.
When someone has a get-well picture and Bayer aspirin, they work wonders.
Here's an important word from Bayer in case the flu epidemic hits your home. When the flu strikes, doctors and public health officials urge you to follow these 3 steps. Rest in bed, drink plenty of fluids, and take aspirin to reduce the fever and relieve the aches. So get Bayer aspirin now. Bayer is 100% aspirin, the world's best aspirin. And aspirin is what doctors and public health officials recommend. For the pains and fever of a cold or flu, Bayer works wonders.
Direct from our newsroom in New York, in color, this has been the CBS Evening News with Harry Reasoner substituting for Walter Cronkite. What will it be like to